This is episode number 235 with Brandi Michelle. Welcome to Brand Yourself, a show devoted to highlighting one very important truth. Being the real and perfect you is your ticket to success. I'm your host, Blair Badenhop, an intuitive brand strategist and messaging expert who has had the honor of supporting hundreds of coaches, best-selling authors, and award-winning entrepreneurs to define their unique value and voice online. And I'm here to remind you that who you really are is your most powerful branding asset. Listen to find out why. Brandi is a happiness, intuitive, and empowerment coach who currently spends her time guiding others in their pursuit of happiness. She has extensive experience working with high-achieving female entrepreneurs, helping them align with financial success while staying true to their values and purpose. While they may initially come to her to scale their business and make more money, they leave with a deeper sense of fulfillment within their lives on a holistic level. So I love this conversation with Brandi so much because we dive into the heart of what we all want in life, which is fulfillment, which is joy. And when we find ourselves in a situation where we don't feel it, what do? She's not only figured this out for herself, but she has helped countless women to discover how to cultivate it from within as well. As you'll hear, her story is so relatable. We chat about her experience achieving all levels of success in her life, from academics to her career, but not finding the fulfillment she was really after, and how this sparked her interest in how to cultivate it from within, her decision to leave behind a demanding corporate job to be more present for her son, and how creating space to do the inner work herself helped her discover her true purpose, what it looked like for her to develop her proprietary method as a coach, start taking on clients, and become a go-to happiness expert, the top 3 things she recommends doing consistently that will completely transform your life, and so much more. As always, everything we discussed in the episode will be available over at blairbadenhop.com/235. All right, without further ado, let's bring on the amazing Brandi Michelle. Welcome, Brandi. I am so excited to have you as a guest on the show today. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Blair. I'm excited for our conversation.
Me too. So before we dive into all things business, I like to start with a deep question. This season, I'm starting with something a little bit different, and that is, what do you believe your purpose is in this lifetime?
Oh, I love that. My purpose is really to help people transform the way they approach happiness, right? And by prioritizing a fundamental aspect of their well-being than really this fleeting byproduct of external success. And I really think that as we cultivate a deeper sense of happiness, really raising our happiness set point, right? Because we'll still have ups and downs, that individuals can lead a more meaningful and purposeful life. But more importantly, it really changes their relationship to success, and the unintended consequences like success flows more easily. And that if we had a world full of happy people, what an amazing world it would be. 8 billion happy people. It's a really gorgeous goal from my perspective.
Yes. So tell us why this is what you believe to be your kind of mission and purpose right now. Like, why does it matter to you?
It matters deeply to me because I was a person who had achieved all levels of success in my life across many different areas. So, I had success in school and in college and in sports, and am still married to an amazing man. And you had all these things, and I still felt like there was something missing. And so as I took a step back, I realized that I was always expecting something else to offer me fulfillment, right? And that I was always actually looking to change something outside of me to help me be the best version of myself. And so I embarked on a journey 7 years ago of just being the very best version of myself. And kind of through that journey, I was able to see clearly that I think we have a world that kind of looks outside of themselves in order to change the world, and that really it's always an inside job, right? And so while we do these beautiful things like philanthropy and et cetera to help change the world. And then we do these less beautiful things like blame other people for all the wrongs in the world. I think really taking a step back and looking in the mirror and saying, like, how can I contribute to making the world a better place? And what am I offering from a place of love? That's really kind of the path that we can all be on to live in a world that we aspire to.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree that it's so easy to point fingers and to take our own stuff out on the external experience that we're having and the people that or things we're seeing happening in the world. And yeah, everything's an inside job, your own joy, your own success, your mindset is key to having the life that you want. And it is so easy to just kind of play victim or whatever the case may be. So I love that. And, for you, what were the things that you started to do differently? I know that you in college, you played sports, you were a captain, then you were selected to be in the Olympic trials or something along those lines. Like you really were exceptional in a lot of ways. And then, you step into your professional path and you achieve a lot of success, quote unquote, in traditional ways of the word, from title to salary and all these things. So what were the things that you had to do differently from an inside perspective?
Yeah, I think what I had to do is so I had a lot of success, as you noted, right? But also the path to that success was always filled with friction, right? Like it was never easy. I felt like I was always taking kind of the difficult route to most of those things. And so when I just realized that, like, oh, I have this belief that it is hard, right? And these were these very limiting beliefs that I had accepted. And many of them are cultural norms and they are kind of like the consciousness of the world that we live in. But when I took a step back and said, I don't have to align with that, I don't have to believe that because I'm a woman, the world is going to be like so challenging for me. And there's this glass ceiling. And that while I kind of had this knowing that I could move through that, I also was like, but it's not going to be easy. No one's going to want it for you. And I just like continued to see that in my life. And so I said, what if I changed my perspective? Like, what if I acknowledge that there are bad actors in the world and also like approach the world from this perspective that I have choice. I have kind of this agency in my own journey, and that while there are bad actors, I don't have to kind of participate in that. And I think that was really like just my first step, right? From a very young age, been obsessed with human potential. And I've been like reading books about it and like diving really deep into it. But I hadn't really embodied these ideas, right? So, like, had the knowledge, hadn't embodied it. And I was like, what if I just like went all in on seeing if this can create a different experience for me? And so I did that through a multitude of ways, but that was kind of the way I reframed my thoughts. Like, you've done all this work and read all these books and haven't really done much with it.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, I think that most people who step on the personal growth pathway, we get into different spiritual teachers, we read lots of books, we listen to podcasts, we go to events and, have people we look up to and follow, but there isn't necessarily like a deep practice or commitment daily to ourselves and the work. And it's so easy to just kind of like absorb all of the knowledge, like you're saying, but not really do anything with it or not go deep enough. So, can you give us an example of you doing the work? Like, is there something you can think back to that was a practice that was really helping you shift your thinking?
Yeah. So, a couple things. The first thing that I really committed to was exploring my personal human design. Like, who am I meant to be in the world? Like, how am I meant to show up? And for me, I'd never really been into astrology or anything of that nature, but it came to me in this really beautiful way. And I just went really deep on it. I was like, I want to know exactly, like, if I show up as I was meant to in this lifetime, kind of what is that supposed to look like? And so I had just deep dives on my own. I set up weekly calls with someone that I love dearly, Erin Claire Jones. And I just wanted to know from every aspect, like what in my experience has been like who I'm meant to be and who I'm meant to show up as, and what is kind of like my not self, like who I'm not supposed to be. And for me, that was like really, really helpful. Like there's this one thing in my personal chart where I am kind of meant to be a leader and meant to be in situations, that I get to kind of lead and guide kind of for the global community. And that had been something that I'd really shied away from, right? Like, even though I had these leadership roles, I was always like shying away from that aspect of it. And so, kind of moving to this place of just like knowing, like, oh no, this is like who you're meant to be. And this is a trait that you should embody wholly and accept. And so, having that like permission to be myself was really, for me, the most important first step. Like, these are traits that are meant to be. And it's nothing that was surprising, but it's just reaffirming in this really beautiful way. And there's also traits that like you're meant to embody that maybe the world isn't as like accepting of. Like for me, I have this ability to like embark on something and then perhaps it no longer lights me up. And it's okay for me to shift away from that. And that's like something that the world doesn't necessarily love. They're like, oh, you've got to stick to it. You've got to like see it through. But if it's not meant for me, I kind of take the learning and then it's okay for me to pivot. And really understanding those things were so, as I mentioned, just reaffirming for me. And then
Mhm.
from there, kind of the aspects of that weren't me, that were like kind of my not self. I spent a lot of time on understanding how to release those things. And I used a lot of kind of more esoteric, but like less known energy modalities to kind of shift those as quickly as I could.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. I had Erin on the show and she's so amazing at what she does. So
She
love
is
her.
so amazing. I love her with every ounce of my being.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. I mean, I think, all of us who have had to really go deep and then have transformation have used lots of different tools along the way. And there's certain ones that really, stand out in our minds. So human design was really supportive for you. And then, I know along the way on your journey, you developed a process that really helped you to emerge as, this more authentic version of yourself. And that ultimately is what you have helped your clients with and the people who follow you in your community. So can you share a little bit more about what that is?
Yes. So I developed a proprietary process. It's 4 steps, and I call it BASE because, in my opinion, these 4 steps are really foundational for all of our lives as we think about the transformation that we're seeking. And so the B is really like really understanding what beliefs have gotten you to this place as it pertains to kind of your happiness in your life. And the A is around alignment. What does happiness look like to you? How does it show up in your life? What does it take to align with your happiness? Right? Because we're usually seeking it because we believe that it will make us happier. We believe that it will, in some way, kind of transform our lives for the positive. But oftentimes, on that journey to aligning to it, we are worried about it. We have fear that we'll fail. We have angst about the timing. And so we're like using these very opposite emotions, these much more dense emotions that really preclude us from moving as quickly to what we're seeking. And there's this beautiful notion that if you were to kind of get into that energy, that vibration in advance of what you're seeking to align with, you can much more quickly kind of get to your goals, right? So alignment's one of the most important things. And then self-awareness, right? So, not blaming yourself, but really understanding, like, how am I creating these situations that aren't in alignment for me? You know, how am I choosing where the homeostasis falls? And why do I keep returning to that place? And self-awareness is often the hardest part, right? Like, we intrinsically can get to this place where we're like looking outside of us for why things aren't going right, right? So you can blame the economy, blame your family, you can blame a colleague, right? So we're always kind of looking outside of us. And so how do we get this self-awareness and really understand that we have the power to direct our course? And then E really is about like this emotional regulation. So we all have emotional resistance in our lives. Usually it was created from kind of when we were 0 to 7, something happened in our lives that has a dense emotion surrounding it. And so we go back to kind of that origin story that really has created a pattern in our lives that we may or may not be aware of. And we want to keep the memory, right, of what happened in our life and like really lovingly release the reaction that we are having to it, because then we can let go of that pattern and move on. And so that's the 4 step process. And the steps aren't always in order, but if you do those 4 things with or without me, there's going to be this really beautiful transformation that you have in your life.
Beautiful. So, what did it look like for you to transition out of a corporate career to starting your business? And obviously, on your own journey, you developed this methodology. So, tell us about how you started to really put that out into the world and do this work full time.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really beautiful story because it's a testament to kind of the process, right? So for me, I believe that when you go through kind of this healing journey or process, the beauty of it is that life just begins to flow and becomes much more easy. And you're going to see these like really amazing synchronicities show up in your life. And that really is how my transition from corporate America to this work happened. So it wasn't actually an exchange. I was in corporate America and I had gotten to a point where my career was fairly successful, but I was covering kind of most of the United States and Canada, and there was just a lot of travel. And at this point in my life, I had a little one, and that just didn't feel aligned for me to be away so much. And early on in the process, like I took him and his nanny like every single place I went until she finally said like, this is really hard for us. And I realized that that was like really a decision I had made for me to feel like, okay, we're all going to be together and it's going to be great. And so I was fortunately in a position where I didn't have to continue to work. So the first step was just my husband and I deciding that like I was going to take a step back so that I could have the time that I chose to be with my little guy. And so then from there, I was continuing to really just work with myself. So every day I would wake up and I do work with myself and think about like what else I needed to have awareness around and evolve and change. And through that work with myself, I had really friends just start to reach out to me and ask me if I could help. And over this time would find myself at dinner parties or like at events or just kind of people asking me for walks or coffee where they were really picking my brain about what I had done to have this increased peace in my life. It was really evident to many people that I was friends with. And so then I was like, oh, this is something that people are seeking from me. And that is where I feel like it was just like this beautiful natural alignment. And so then I started like to put together like, okay, what is it exactly that I do? And how do I share that succinctly with people? And what are the steps that I would give people? And not from the perspective of being their coach, but just from the perspective of like, these are friends. And like, how do I take what I've done kind of over a lifetime and distill it in this really beautiful way? And so that's how it started. And so then I just started working with friends and then they started referring me to friends. And that was really the base, no pun intended, but of my business.
Yeah, I think that happens for so many people when they start. It's a very organic word of mouth thing. And I know when I started my business, it was all referral based too. So, what did it look like for you to transition from just doing it for friends to like really taking it seriously as like, this is my business and charging for it and, having a bit
Yeah.
more of that like structure?
Yes. I think that's like the best part, right? Because from there, there was just this really beautiful place where people had gotten good results and they were coming back to me and saying, like, wow, this was really helpful. And I was like, oh, okay. I think that this is my purpose in the world. Like I knew it kind of in the back of my head, but that feedback loop really helped me think about how do I sit down and do this. And as someone who'd run teams and like been in sales, I just took a step back and really just started to script out like, okay, what would a business look like and how can I help people and how can I really affect change in this way? And so from there, I really just, it wasn't really a business plan, but I just thought about kind of what are the pieces and parts that I'll need. I'm lucky that my husband invests in businesses for a living. So I was able to pick his brain quite a bit around like how to kind of start and develop. And from there, I just developed a plan. And as I put that plan in place, and then I kind of hired a couple people that could scaffold in the support that I needed because it's still very important to me that I can spend a lot of quality time with my little guy. And then we just like let people know, right? So let people know on social media. And I started this newsletter that I call my journal entries, and it launched. Now we release it on the 1st and 15th of every month. But I just had a newsletter. And the first time that I sent the newsletter out, I set it up in the system to go out at, 4 o'clock or whatever in the morning. And by the time I woke up, like people on the East Coast had like sent me so many responses. And I remember I actually like pinged Erin Claire Jones and I was like, oh my gosh, so many people resonated with my journal entry. And then from there, we just scaled. And for me, usually all things around like pricing and next steps, I go into this really deep meditative process. And that's how I come up with those answers. And that's how I take every step. And I don't try to think too far down the path. I just think like, okay, I'll take one step at a time that's kind of grounded in like belief from my perspective and then continue to grow from there.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Beautiful. It sounds like it was very, intuitive and, kind of feminine way of leading
Yes.
versus taking on the very cerebral, strategic, more masculine way of running a business, which I think, there's a place for both elements. And I'm sure that that's kind of how you approach things, but letting it be free, like really just not holding on to it, like with white knuckle grip in the beginning, it sounds like was really what allowed it to be whatever it needed to turn into on its own with your guidance and leadership.
Yes. And I think I'd spent kind of these 15 years on the other side, right? Of like spreadsheets and strategy and like meetings and feedback and PowerPoints. And I'd done that, for so much of my career. And it really, from like a worldly perspective, had served me very, very well. And, for this, I just wanted to take one inspired step at a time, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it didn't have to be anything per se, right? For me, this really, it's just an expression of what I think my gift to the world will be. And it doesn't have to be so big or so small. Every single person that I help, I keep in this little book that my girlfriend gave me. And for me, that's the joy. One person is like, oh, that changed my life. It's amazing.
Mm, beautiful. Yeah. So it sounds like you're not putting a lot of pressure on it. And like you said, you at the start of things have been in a situation where you didn't need to be necessarily earning a certain amount of money to support your life because you have a partner who's, there and you both contribute in whatever way you need to. But it sounds like there wasn't a ton of like, I think sometimes when people start businesses, there's this insane pressure they put on things. They need to make a certain amount of money so they can leave their full-time job. And it's like they want their business to save them or something. And I think often when we take all of that pressure off, no matter what our financial situation might be, that's what allows things to start to flow in. And so I think that, because you were approaching it with that lightness and just kind of creativity and play and just like, having it be an expression of yourself, like that's, I think, a lot of times what allows things to grow and build momentum.
Yes, I will second that. I think all the time it does. And I know it's sometimes hard, like when I'm talking to people and I'm like, if you're so focused on the money, if you're so focused on the specificity of it, it's like trying to clench, a handful of water or a handful of sand. You just can't. You have to cup it very lightly. And, sometimes people are like, well, that's easy for you to say. But what I want people to know is like, you have to think like, is it the chicken or the egg? I think oftentimes people think, oh, you don't worry about money because you have money. But I would invite people to perhaps think maybe I have money because I don't worry about money, right? And so I think there's this really nuanced distinction that's so important for people to realize, that it is being able to approach life from this perspective of knowing, right? Like you have to have this deep sense that your success is inevitable, and it just helps you align with it much more easily, right? Like when I looked back over my corporate career, what I realized was that no matter how many people were in my organization or the revenue that I was responsible for, I'd always finished in the top 15%. But I never like thought really deeply about that. While I was, you mentioned this masculine kind of based leader, I have to win, I have to win, I have to win. It really was just this expectation that I would. And that's just a very different energy. And the universe responds to that energy differently. And I have found that kind of when we shift out of that because we feel like this urgency or necessity to align with our success for whatever reason much more quickly, it really only serves to separate you more from that which you're seeking. And so, like, trying to be in this really light space is going to help you align much more easily with that which you're seeking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautifully said. And I think, what we're also talking about here is trust, like a deep trust in yourself, in life. And yeah, this knowingness, like it's like something you just carry in your cells, like in your bones. It's a knowing, it's a security, confidence, and I think a lot of the inner work and mindset work that people have to do is building that confidence and that knowing and that trust, and not giving into the fear-based or limiting beliefs that so many of us have carried around for a lifetime. Like you're saying, from 0 to 7, things happen, and we carry these beliefs about ourselves and what's possible for us from a young age into our adult lives. And that influences our actions and our behavior and what our outcomes are. So I think one of the big points of, this conversation is really just look inward. Like, how are you potentially limiting, calling in, attracting, having what you want? And I think, sometimes people can say, oh, that sounds so simple. It can't just be that simple. And it's not necessarily simple, but I think that our internal world very much dictates what we perceive externally and how we feel externally, what we manifest externally. And so, you've talked a lot about like vibration and energy, and we know about teachers like Abraham Hicks and the law of attraction and all of these things. Is there somebody that you have followed, or like a way of thinking or philosophy that you subscribe to that has really, been a constant on this journey?
Yeah, I think I love Abraham Hicks for sure. But someone that I deeply respect and whose works I've read nearly all of them is David R. Hawkins. And he wrote Power versus Force. And he just has this like really beautiful explanation of kind of like consciousness and how consciousness works, and how as we rise up in our levels of consciousness, life becomes easier and more synchronous for us. And he also wrote a book called Letting Go. And those two books, I've read them both many, many times. He has other books that I've also read, but the two of them, really are foundational for how I think about the world. And I think, yeah, I would highly recommend them. They're pretty dense. So they're not like first books that you would ever read about consciousness, but they're, I think, some of the most important. And I
Mm.
think in terms of the law of attraction and manifestation, I always urge people to really have this belief that you're co-creating everything in your life, right? I think sometimes the challenges with thinking about manifestation or the law of attraction is that we put our energy into like one thing, right? Like, oh, okay, I'm going to build a business that's worth $100,000 this year, that's worth $1 million this year, that's worth whatever, or I'm going to move into a new house, or I'm going to manifest a partner. And I think it serves us to actually realize that every single thing that's going on in our lives is a co-creation of what's happening in our brains and ultimately our bodies, right? And so that as we heal, as we clear our beliefs, and as we kind of release emotions that may be stuck in our bodies, then we're able to co-create a beautiful life in all aspects, right? Like, I encourage people to think of life kind of as these three legs to the stool, right? So we'll have health and wellness, which can be anything from kind of weight to beauty to disease. And then we have relationships, platonic and romantic. And then this third level of the stool is kind of success and financial, career and entrepreneurship. And oftentimes we're going to focus really deeply on one aspects of the stool. And unless you raise kind of your happiness set point, which is what I call it, just to make it more approachable, and Dr. Hawkins thinks about it from the perspective of consciousness, if we don't raise our happiness set point or don't change our consciousness, then those three things have to stay in homeostasis. So as you send all of your energy to one aspect of that, then those other two legs of the stool are going to falter, right? And you're going to see challenges arise in those areas. But if we're raising our happiness set point, if we're thinking about our level of consciousness in totality, then we can kind of really co-create this more beautiful life that has all three legs of the stool kind of really secure. And I think because people aren't thinking about it in that way, that's where we get these articles and these sayings about, like, you can't have it all, you can't do it all, because people are just trying to take their available energy, right? Because energy can't be created or destroyed, and send it all towards one aspect. And then other things are going to not be able to thrive in the same way. But if
Mm.
we kind of release that kind of stuck energy in our bodies that's gotten there because of these, big T or little t traumatic occurrences, then we can actually like have that energy available to have kind of this entirety of our lives be in this really beautiful place. And so I think it's really important to like step back from thinking about manifestation and thinking instead about, like, how do I co-create a beautiful experience across the totality of my life.
Mm. Oh, this is really good. This is really, really interesting. So I think you make a great point that people tend to put all of their focus and energy towards one thing at a time. Usually it's kind of like everything's very separate. Like, I have this bucket of my life and this bucket of my life. And I think anyone listening right now is probably putting a ton of energy into their business and the work that they want to do in the world. And I know for me, like, I grew up with a dad who was super hardworking, and I wound up not seeing him as that much growing up. He would always come home late, but it was instilled in me that, like, being a hard worker is a good thing. Like, that's how you
Mhm.
become successful. And so what I've found is, like, as soon as I started my business was everything to me. Like, and I devoted so much time and energy to it. And it wasn't until I became a mother that I realized that I was pouring so much of myself into that I wasn't giving enough to the people that I love. And also, I was just identifying with being an entrepreneur. That was like, I was holding on to that, and my worth was so wrapped up in it. And so I think that can happen a lot of times, especially if you are the type of person who is an achiever and, like, go getter and likes to build things and hardworking, all those, it can really pull you into that space of neglecting other areas of your life and burning out. So, this idea of raising your happiness set point in order to, it sounds like, a bit more balance to how you're operating inside of everything. So you're not pouring all of your energy into one thing, but can kind of spread it out more evenly. Is so interesting. Like, a way of thinking that's like really kind of blowing my mind a little bit. And I think I, like, in a way, have been doing that more so since becoming a mom, because I have to be more present in different areas and devoting myself to different areas. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about what it means to raise your happiness set point and how that does shift how you operate in life.
Yes. So I think that how you operate, right, they're separate in some ways, right? So I'd first say energy can't be created or destroyed. And I'm going to repeat a little bit of what I shared before. So we have this available energy, and over the course of our lives, things happen to us oftentimes that are outside of our control. And when those things happen, it can impact kind of our nervous system. And then when that happens, and this is going a little bit deep, we have this bound up energy. And so as we go through any kind of healing process, right? So I tell people, healing and spirituality to me is like working out. Just pick what's going to work for you and do it. And I promise you're going to evolve your life in some way, shape, or form, and it'll like get you on the path. Right. And so as you're doing these healing work, right, whether it be like body work or kind of subconscious capacity building, which is what I call the work that I do around our brains, you're going to then release energy that you now have available again. So it was yours as a little baby, but something happened, it got bound up. And so now this is why you see like more friction happening in your life, feel as though you have to make choices about what you can be available for, what you can't be available for. And the way to know that you have energy that is pent up is because it'll show up as pain in your body. It'll show up as like ruminating around the same thing. It shows up as worry, as angst. Like all of these things should be signs to you that, like, oh, all of my energy is not being directed to my greatest and highest good. And there is work that I can do that can help me as I think about all aspects of my life. Right. And so when you have that self-awareness. Like I love that you said, "Oh, I had a child and then I reflected on my life and saw that like I have a hardworking father and that I wasn't spending as much time as I would love to with people that I love." And so when you get that self-awareness, those aha moments, and then you kind of heal and clear, now you can like raise the tide, right? And a rising tide lifts all boats, right? So I think first you have to just realize like, oh, I am more often than I would like to be in this fight or flight mode, right? Like I'm worried and tense. So that means that I can shift that energy towards these more high vibration emotions, which are peace, love, happiness, joy. And by doing that, I will raise my happiness set point. And when I raise my happiness set point, I'm going to start to see that life gets easier for me, that life is in flow for me, that there's more synchronicities. And then I don't have to work as hard to have what I am seeking. And when I don't have to work as hard, then all three legs of that stool can thrive. But when I have to work really hard around money, which is almost always what people focus on first, which makes sense because it is like you need money in our society to survive. So people focus all their energy on that. And then they see that their relationships, suffer, or, even worse, that their health suffers in these really big ways. And so I believe that for me, anytime I set a goal personally or professionally, the first thing I do is check in with myself to see like what healing do I need to do to align with this? What blocks do I have from aligning with this? And when I do the inner work first, then the outer journey is much more easy.
Mm.
Did that answer your question, Blair?
Yes, 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 yes. Thank you so much for, just peeling back another layer of like what this all means. And it sounds something like daily meditation or just like certain practices that you integrate into your life daily.
Yeah, I'd love to give three things that I tell people. If you can't afford to work with anybody else, if you do these three things, I think your life will improve if we have time.
Yes, please.
Awesome. So, the first thing I think that people should work towards is meditation. So, and really like meditation from the perspective of not mindfulness, but like learning a meditative practice that can actually change your brain waves, right? So, we're spending most of our time in this kind of beta state, which is like this go, go, go state. And then we sleep and we're in this delta state. But there's these two other beautiful brain waves, alpha and theta. And when you're in this place, there are these places of co creation. And we're there as a little child, which is why those first 7 years impact our lives so much because they actually send signals out into the world about who we are and who we're going to show up as. And so, if you can find a practice that allows you to settle your brain into those alpha and theta states, you're going to connect your kind of low brain, which is your primitive brain, your pre-verbal brain. You're going to connect it with that high brain, which is like the brain of intellect and synchronicity. And when you connect those two together, again, you're going to transform and shift your life in these really beautiful ways. And so that is a really important step. And the second step is really around journaling. The average human has about 70,000 thoughts per day. 90% of those thoughts are repetitive, and 80% of them, unfortunately, are kind of these negative thoughts, right? And so if we can really quiet our brain, like meditation will help with that, but also journaling just helps you get all of those thoughts out of your head onto paper, which means they don't have to repeat themselves in your brain. So I offer to people, if you can wake up and for, maybe 1 to 3 pages of paper or 10 to 15 minutes of time, whichever you prefer, your choice, just get everything you're thinking out of your head. And that's going to help again to quiet your brain and make it more available to creation. And the thing about that practice is when I first started, I'd be writing and then I'd find myself that I'd stop writing and I was just thinking and ruminating. And so it also just brought this beautiful self awareness like, oh, you really need this practice because you can't even write enough to stop thinking. And so it helps you kind of refocus your energy. And like I said, have energy available to co creation. And then the third thing is having this like really beautiful in the now gratitude practice. So, whether I get a parking spot or an extra hug from my little guy, or, someone does a kind deed for me on the street, no matter how big it is or how small, a new home, right? Like I really pause in that moment and I express gratitude to the person if it was an exchange, to the universe if it's something that came to me. And I feel that emotion of joy, like, oh, wow, like this is really great. And this allows us to not take anything for granted. And similar to like receiving a gift, when you tell the gift giver, thank you, they are more prone to think of giving you more gifts, right? And so just pausing in this really beautiful way and acknowledging that which is already coming to you, because we all have those things. And you mentioned earlier this idea of like we choose kind of what we see. And so I believe the same, right? So there's 8 billion people in the world, which means there's trillions of experiences going on at any given time. And the aperture through which we see the world is based on our inner world. And so the more that we can shift that aperture and focus on that which is good, the more that is what we're going to see. And the more that we attract to us in this really beautiful way. And so I know for sure that if people can make a deep commitment to doing those three things, even if they do nothing else, that they will see a shift in their experiences and in the life that they're living.
So good. So good. Yes. And I'm sure, everyone listening, based on what you're passionate about, based on the work that you're doing in the world, like I'm sure you dabbled or you are practicing meditation, or I'm sure you've dabbled or are doing journaling. And we go in and out of these self-care practices or gratitude practices. And there really is such power to the consistency of doing them. This is such a beautiful reminder. It's reminding me to recommit to things. And I'm sure for anyone listening, it's reminding them as well. These sound so simple, but they really are really powerful. And the times where I have been in consistent meditation practice are the times where I have felt so much more at ease. And because of that energy, you're right, things start to flow with a bit more ease as well. So great reminders. Thank you so much, Brandi, for sharing those.
And I think that we are always looking for that which is really complex to help us, because we can't
Or like
believe
the
that the
magic
answers are right in
formula
front of yes.
that doesn't
Yeah. We're
require
like,
the
well, what's
work.
the magic? I know. And I tell people all the time, like, what I'm going to tell you is really simple, but it won't be easy, right? But you don't want to trick yourself into thinking it's too simple to change your lives, because to your point, nothing that I said just now was revolutionary. I do think there's nuances to how you do each of those three things that sometimes people don't align with as perfectly as would make impact as quickly, but they're very simple and everyone will like shake their head and be like, yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. And then when I say, well, do you do them? And they're like, well, no. Oh, okay. Well, so it's really about the like action. And so instead, I think often someone will be listening and just say, well, I already know that. And it's like, absolutely. But are you doing it? Like, you got to do it.
Yeah, it goes back to the part of our conversation earlier where it's like we can absorb all the knowledge about what we should be doing, but if we're not in practice, we're not going to see the transformation that we want.
Not at
So,
all.
yes, yes, yes. So beautiful. So, a couple final questions for you.
Yeah.
One is, how have you integrated the real Brandi into your online presence and the aesthetic and the voice of your website, your social media? How do you feel like you're really showing up authentically online?
Yes. I think that anyone who knows me knows that like I don't have two versions of me. This is just who I am. I like have always just kind of said what I've meant. And I think like now what I mean is from a more loving place, but I'm still like a pretty direct person and just like have these kind of underpinnings of who I've always been. And I just show up that way. And I show up that way with my clients, right? Like, so, if I'm like, hey, here's the action step. Do you agree this will like help you change and evolve? And someone comes back and they haven't done it. I'm like, okay, well, the energy work and all these other things that we're doing are helpful, but, whatever you believe in, God, the divine, infinite intelligence, your highest version of yourself, like only empowers you to change your life. So someone is holding space for you, but if you don't take action, your life won't change. Like there's no one coming kind of to save you. And I just generally take that approach. I think many years ago, I thought that if I evolved and changed, that I'd end up like this quiet, meek yogi and that it wouldn't be who I was. But I found that even as I kind of increase my happiness set point, I just still am who I am and I don't know who else to be. So that's how I show up in all my interactions and time. If you read my journals, they're just like me. Like, yeah. I always say, I made a commitment many, many years ago before I even started kind of deep diving on who I was to like always be as transparent and honest as humanly possible, even if I felt like it would hurt people's feelings or like there would be, and I do that. And I said to someone who like, it was someone who was like kind of telling a little white lie. And I said, people always feel if you're not being genuine. They may not know it. They may not be able to say like, oh, Brandi wasn't telling the truth, but their soul knows it. And so if you want to connect with people, you have to be the most authentic version of yourself, because I think in business, if you see as an entrepreneur that people aren't coming to you, it's because they don't know who you are. And so you'll think like, well, why I've done, this website that this amazing website developer said would be great. And I changed all of my pitch or whatever based on this marketing agency or whatever, or what I read in a book, but people don't align with that. And they won't even be able to tell you why. They may tell you like, oh, your website's beautiful and this works and that works. But people have an underlying knowing about other people. And even if they can't put words to it, it will kind of preclude you from being successful. So I urge every entrepreneur to just show up as the most authentic version of themselves and know that your people will come. There's 8 billion people in the world. You don't need all of them to be your clients, but a subset of those people are your people. But they can only find you when you're you.
Oh, yes. I so agree. And I've said that, I feel like so many times on this show to my clients as well, where it's like, your people will only find you if they can see the real you, because you and who you are authentically is meant for them and they will know it. And it will just be a feeling. And so, yeah, figuring out how you can just let go of the desire to edit yourself, the desire to look outside yourself for inspiration and see what other people are doing and trying to copy other people, or just, whatever, not intentionally copying, but like letting that influence how you show up. All of those things need to be let go of in order for you to just be you. And getting to know who that is important so that you can put that out there. And so that's what makes a brand, I think, magnetic. And that's why the show's called Brand Yourself, because it's just like, just be you and put yourself out there in the way that, is you expressed, like just you.
I love that. And the opposite is true. If people like steal things for you, I have, friends or clients who's like, oh, someone's using content but they can never be you. So also just like release that to the universe too. Like when we get so caught up in it.
There's so much wasted energy on that when people are like, oh no, someone stole my thing. And like, oh, I have to do something about it. And it's like, yeah, but it's not going to work for them. It just won't. So yeah, totally agree. And, one thing that I have found over the years, I've had my business for almost 10 years now. And one thing that became clear during the pandemic, when I became a mom for the first time, was that I can find this like deep sense of solace and fulfillment in my work that I wasn't expecting. Like it's mine and it just serves this deeper purpose for me. And I'm curious, what has been the most fulfilling thing about your work, and like, how have you found solace in it through some challenging times in your life?
I would say that Well, the work that I do with others is the work that I do with myself. So when I feel as though there's kind of any impending challenge or friction in my life, I go right to the work, right? Like just sit with myself. I really will like start to evaluate my own beliefs and how that's shaping my experience. And I have a lot of rigor around that process. So I believe any friction that shows up in my life on any level is a message. And I think the wisdom is to learn the lesson as quickly as possible. So like if I'm walking out my door, Blair, and I like trip down the like stairs, even if I don't fall, I will like pause and try to check in to see, okay, you're trying to get my attention for some reason. And what is it that you're trying to tell me? And I approach life with that level of rigor at this point in my life because I think I've had a lot of lessons that I probably got really late and wish that I'd gotten them a little earlier. So I use this work with myself constantly. And I think that is part of the authenticity for me. And like, because I have found so often that people want to work with others and they're not doing the work for and with themselves. And so I don't necessarily think that I find solace in the work that I do with others as much as this work serves me and it allows me to continue to evolve the way in which I work with others. And then I think that what I find in working with others is just like the joy of watching people's transformation, right? And when I find these like random notes in my mailbox or in my inbox from clients that perhaps I worked with some time ago that just want to check in and tell me how grateful they are and how well things are going. And for me, that keeps me going, right? Like, so sometimes I'm talking to my husband and I'm like, well, like, how do you think I can scale in this way or think about this? And he'll just say, like, oh, well, you have a great product. He's like, half the people in the world that I work with don't even have a great product and they're trying to scale a business. He's like, the easiest way to continue to grow is to have something that works. And so for me, it's always the reminder like the work works and people are happy. And so I find kind of joy in that. And then, when I'm having challenging times, I just use it for myself.
Beautiful. Love it. All right, Brandi, it has been such a pleasure to have you on the show and to have this conversation. I just feel like I could talk to you for hours about all of these things. We're just really scratching the surface here, but I'm really grateful that you found your way to your path and that you are doing this work. I think it's so important and, more important than ever in the world that we're living in today. So thank you, thank you, thank you for your time and your service. And how can I and everyone listening support you?
Oh, amazing. Well, for anyone who's just looking to kind of stay connected with me, I do have the journal that I publish on the 1st and 15th, and you can find that on my website. And on June 6th, I'm launching a 4-week program that I'm really excited about. And so it's for anyone who feels like something might be missing in their life, just to realize that they're really not alone in that and that they can kind of reframe and prioritize their happiness. And that was me. And so I found that like by using my base framework for myself, that I led a more fulfilling life. And so we're offering that to people now kind of through this online 4-week program called the Joy Blueprint. And if you sign up before June 6th, you also get a free coaching session with me. So I definitely have that. And you can find both the free journal entries as well as the Joy Blueprint on my website, www.brandymichelle.com.
Awesome. Okay. Well, everything that Brandi just mentioned will be available in the show notes, a link to her website and this offer and all the things. So you can check it out. Also her Instagram, if you want to follow along, join her email list. So yes, thank you so much, Brandi, for sharing that with us. And I really, again, appreciate you for being here with me today.
Thank you so much, Blair. I appreciate your time. And for everyone who's listening, thanks for spending this time with us.